We should be recording. It's 54 minutes past 11. Hello, and welcome to the Midlife Creation webinar. I'm just going to check and see that people can hear me. So I'm going to unmute one person, Karen Thompson, for one moment. Hello, Karen, can you hear me?
G'day, yes I can.
Excellent.
Really well.
Good. Can you see the screen in front of you?
I can. Right now it's changing size a couple of times, but I've got a little bit cut off on the left and I've got a bit of black on the right.
Okay, well, you can see the picture in the middle and my name, and
I can't see the picture of you actually. It's cut off quite a bit on the left. Oh, that's much better. I can see the picture of you.
Excellent.
And the N is cut off a little bit. Now there we go. Now we're getting it. Thank you. Brilliant.
No, great, Glenn. Thank you. All right, good. Well, I think we're ready to go. So I'm just going to mute you again, Karen. If anybody, there's probably going to be too many people for me to go to on the call one by one, but please feel free to put your hand up or put a note in the chat, and I will get back to you either straight away, bring it up on the call, or I'll get back to you as soon as possible in the next 24 hours or so. But just feel free to put comments in the chat, and we'll see how much we can include. All right, I'm going to mute you again now. Nothing personal. There we go, Karen. All right. So thank you everyone for coming onto the call, the Midlife Creation Conversation. I've met some of you, many of you I don't know. This call is going to go for just under an hour, and we're going to talk about what it means to create the second half of your life. And it's definitely a big conversation at the moment, both professionally and personally. There are a lot of us in this between 38 and 52 to 58 years old. It's not an area of life that people are putting a lot of attention to. There's quite a large conversation about the millennials and boomers, but this is probably the critical, most important single phase of your life, the part of your life where you actually get to create the long second half. And as we'll talk about a little bit later on, also the part of your life where you're actually got the role, the beginning to training to be an elder, and what it means to bring that into society. And so this conversation is about how do you create the second half of your life in a way that allows you to be fully self-expressed and give back to the community and give back to your family and live a life of joy for what is probably the longest second half, the next 40 to 50 years. So I wanted to share a quick story. This is me and my family as we were traveling around France a couple of years ago when I was 39 and turned 40 just after this photo took place. And I wanted to share with you quickly what it was that got me into this kind of position to have these conversations with people today. I was 38 years old and I had kind of won all the games that you're meant to play in the early stages of your life. I had a great family, I had a career, I was the CEO of a not-for-profit, which is kind of my life goal. I had a house and a property and, you know, everything was going well, but I'd kind of got to the CEO's position and I was looking at the next 40 years and I was thinking, gosh, do I really want to kind of just work my way up the career chain for the next 40 odd years? And I wasn't excited about doing that. So my wife, being, you know, an extraordinary human being, said to me, I think we should take some time off and have a look at this. So we did. We traveled, we went overseas for a year and we looked at what it was that we wanted in our lives. And what really prompted this was a couple of conversations I had with people in their 70s. You know, when I looked around at the people that I knew in my life that were close to me, like my uncle and my father and other people, members of my family, they all said something that was similar and really shocked me. My uncle said, well, it's funny, Sonny, talking to you, but the thing that strikes me most when I think about my life over the last 70 odd years is everything I talk about with my friends that it was exciting happened before I was 40. And then I thought about my father and I thought, gosh, you know, when he turned about 40 years old, he turned on the 7 o'clock news. And I remember he started doing that about that stage and just pretty much clocked off and started just winding down his life. And he's never really wound it back up again. And I thought, gosh, that's not really what I want for myself and my life. So we took a year to discover our passions. And interestingly enough, what happened was we discovered that our greatest passion was travel. It was the thing that we most loved to do. And we were doing it. But it was also a revelation for both of us. And I don't know how many of you have experienced this going through those middle years of your lives. And if you do, please say something on the chat. But we also found that those first 3 months of traveling together was very difficult. We had 4 children. We built a life together. We thought we were kind of rock solid. And then we spent 3 months together and realized that we were no longer aligned on what we wanted for the second half or even that part of our life. And we literally fought like cats and dogs for 3 months in this beautiful countryside. It wasn't the holiday we were hoping it was going to be. And then after 3 months, it started to get a little bit better. And after 6 months, we started to get aligned. And for the second half of that year, we really started to look at what it was that we were passionate about for the second half of our life and what we were not passionate about. And I discovered that what I wanted to do was teach and travel. And my wife discovered that what she wanted to do was to never see a school again. She was a teacher and travel. So we got clear on what the second half of our life was going to look like. And we came back and started to build a business, and I left my job and we moved to Indonesia, and we built this business where I can walk beside people who are going through that same journey that I went through in those years, and how to craft the second half of life that fulfills on your passions, in my case, teaching and traveling. And when I noticed that, when I looked around and saw what was the distinguishing feature between those people that had made the transition to the second half of life really well, and those people like my father and my uncle who kind of had wound down for their second half, I noticed something unique that was distinguishing all of them, and that was the ones that made the transition well all had structures around them. They had guides or mentors or people who would hold them and support them in that second half of life. And those that didn't. They tried to do it on their own. And when I look around at the people in my life now, and I look at my clients, and I look at the people who are struggling with this at this stage of their life, it's consistently those that are making that transition through the 40s, what Rudolf Steiner called the dark wood, the part of your life where you can't really see what the path looks like, and you're not meant to, and we're going to get to that in a minute. They had people beside them, walking beside them, who kind of helped them through the dark wood and said, this is the path, keep going, you're on the right track. And those people that didn't kind of got lost in that little bit because they didn't have anyone there kind of to guide them through it. So I've created myself in that role as like a midlife coach, someone who helps people, like a guide, helping people walk through that second half of life, like a map. You know, if you have to walk through that second part, if you have to walk through the dark wood, you often can't see the other side. And I'll get to exactly why that is in a minute, but we struggle a lot in those middle years with concerns around, have I done the right thing in the first half of my life? Did I play the game well? Did I produce, have I got the relationships I wanted? Have I got the money? Have I got the creativity? All the things that I was trying to do in the first half of life, did I do that well? And look, even me, like I do this work. Last night I woke up, and it's often around 5 o'clock in the morning that we wake up and we experience those doubts. Did I do the right thing? Did it work? Was I where I was meant to be? And what's the second half going to look like? Is it going to look like, what's it going to look like? So it's a period of doubt. And the reason for this is that we have made a fundamental mistake in the way that we imagine life as a human being to look. And our society has crafted a picture of our life as a linear trajectory from start to finish in a straight diagonal line up an XY graph from the beginning to the end, and at the end you kind of fall off the perch. And what the problem with that is that you are always, 50% of the population are always losers and 50% are doing well. But in any area of your life that you look at, there's always someone doing better than you and someone not doing as well as you, and you're on the clock all the time. I'm now 42. Have I got this? And I hear this from a client just the other day. I'm 42 years old. I haven't got the CEO job that I thought I should get. My relationship is okay. My kids, I've only got 2 kids. I wanted to have 4. Whatever it is, there's kind of you're on the clock. You're always comparing and assessing yourself with other people who might be at a different position to you. And there's this kind of linear progression to the end. This is not an appropriate way to look at our life. The way we should be looking at our life is much more nuanced. And it is a way that people throughout history until recently have always looked at the life of a human being. We've kind of forgotten some of that wisdom. So what I've done is I've put it together as a model that will explain and hopefully give us all a little bit more freedom around what the trajectory of our life really looks like. So this is the span of your life. I'm just going to get up a little highlighter pen here so I can highlight. All right, I hope you can all see this. So at the beginning of your life, you're a baby and you are physically relatively inept. And if any of you, I assume all of you have been with babies before, they're also, you might notice, they're kind of not quite here. They're really kind of up with the cosmos. And at that stage of a human being's life, you're at your weakest physically and at your furthest from the kind of hard reality of the world. And then as you grow a little bit older, you kind of come into your body and you get more and more present to the world around you. And you'll see this with 6. I've got an 11-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I've seen this progression with my children. They come into their body at around 7, and they start to become present to the world around them. And that progresses until you reach about 35, the middle of the arc of your life, where you are at your most present, your most concrete, and your most powerfully related to the world around you. You understand the world. People say, I know where I'm at now. I know in my life what I'm good at, what I'm not good at. I know kind of where I want to go. It's a period of great confidence and emotional strength and physical strength, and quite an exciting period. The reason for this is because you've expanded yourself physically up until that point in your life. You are on a growth trajectory for the first half of your life. The trajectory of your life is up, 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 up on that linear progression that we were talking about earlier. So you get stronger and more capable and more confident, and you experience more and more of life and understand your limitations and your strengths and what you want and where you want to go and how you're going to get there. And you play the games of life that the first half of life are meant to give you. Your relationship, your relationships, I should say, you struggle with them, you learn from them, you learn how to do them, how not to do them. And about this stage of life, you kind of got what you've got by the 40s. You've got to, and the same thing with money. You kind of learn about money, you learn about how to manage money, you learn about career, where you want to go, where you don't want to go, you make a few false starts. You might suffer a little bit. You learn about what it takes to kind of create the life that you want until you reach that middle part of your life where it all kind of comes together and you've got confidence and you're physically strong and you know where you want to go and you've got the energy to go there. Now, that's a very powerful stage of life. And it's exciting. And the mistake that we make in our society is we assume that's it. You're kind of there, and then that line is just gonna, the physical line is just gonna keep on going, and you're gonna keep growing, expanding, and building. The reality is that it's not like that. And those of us who have lived into and through the 40s, and those people who have lived into the 60s and 70s who speak about this, speak very clearly about the middle stage of life as this sudden period of, well, not always sudden, but this period of doubt where this voice starts to creep into your mind and say, is this really what I want? Is this really enough? Is this really all there is to it? And you also start to experience a decline in your physical capacities. That starts at around 38, you don't always notice it then, and goes into 42 and into your mid-40s, where you just don't bounce back the way that you've bounced back before. You don't experience your physicality as your kind of most important attribute, or at least you shouldn't, because you're on the trajectory of life that is actually a declining one, not a growth one, towards decay and eventually towards death. And we talk about those middle years in a lot of ways in our society around, we use terms like midlife crisis, like it's a bad thing, like you shouldn't be having a midlife crisis. We talk about mid-career, we talk about, people grappling with, we see divorces, we see lots of mental illness, lots of depression. A lot of that comes from the fact that our identity and who we know ourselves to be, that we've spent 30 to 40 years building in this trajectory of our life, we're holding on to it as that line of our life starts to decline. And it becomes harder and harder to maintain that identity. It takes more and more energy when you've actually got less and less energy to invest in it. And it also somehow starts to feel like it's kind of not quite the right path. And that's because it's not. That doesn't lead you anywhere. Around here is where you start to get middle-aged men who want to buy Harley Davidsons or have a real struggle in the middle part of their life around their career, and a lot of breakdowns. And women who wake up, I get clients, for women it's a bit different. They kind of, their kids grow up a little bit, they're starting to move out of home, or they're an age where they kind of know that that's resolved, or they're kind of at a crossroads in their career and they're like, I need to start focusing on me now. I need to start figuring out what I need and what I want for my life, but they've forgotten how to kind of do that. And a lot of the suffering that we see of people in this middle part of life actually comes from the gap between this trajectory, the spiritual or the kind of relationship with the cosmos, the relationship with your gift, what you've got to give back, and this, your material, physical experience of life, what you've got, what you have, what you want, what's more about you. And the longer you go through your life, the bigger that gap gets. I have a client who's 62 years old, and she's right at the end of this process here. And 63 is pretty much, this line here pretty much stops at 63. So she's done some of this work. So she's somewhere in the middle around here. That voice inside her that started around 33 and really started to speak at 38 is, by this stage of her life, so loud, it's screaming at her, this is what you need to be doing. This is your gift. This is the piece that you've got to give into the world. You've got to hear me now. So she's just moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, bam, 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 to lift her life up to a focus on what is her gift. I've got a client who's 39, who's right back here. That voice isn't as loud for him, but he can hear already that there's something else that he needs to be doing, and he's quite clever, and he's getting on that journey quite early and starting to look at, well, what's this gap look like? If I was to be this person, what would my leitmotif, what would this path look like? So we're working on, with both of these people, and this is the work there is to do in your 40s, is to look back over the life that you have lived and all the crazy stuff that you did and all the experiences that you had with relationships and money and career, all that stuff, and start to draw the golden thread, the recurring theme, the piece that has consistently shown up throughout your life in the midst of all the mayhem. That's the first part of life. That might not have been the physical one, by the way. In fact, it isn't. But that's the clear, crystal clear gift that you've spent your life experiencing over and over and over again, so that around this part of your life you can make that transition and start crafting a life that allows you to give it back. And the 40s, as you see here, is a period of self-fullness. It's a period of self-discovery. Whereas in the first half of life, it's a period of creation, trying new things. The second half of life, the middle part, I should say, is a period of discovery, discovering what that leitmotif is. What is the recurring theme in the first half of your life that you can now hang the second half of your life off and create your life as a self-expression of that thing. So I'm going to come back to this model a little bit later. My question, and you don't need to answer it now, but I want you to start thinking from that first half of your life and what might that recurring theme be for you. We're going to hear a few stories about that as you go forward. You might be able to pull out a little bit about that. Cherie is on the call. I'm going to get her to have a share. If there's someone who thinks they know what it is, feel free to put your hand up and maybe I can get you on the call for 2 or 3 minutes, although no pressure. But your job is to, of the rest of this call, to have a think about, well, what might that recurring theme be in your life that would be the thing to give back in the second half. So what I'm going to do now is just talk about one woman who did that transition extremely well and showed kind of the world how to do that. Her name is Emily Carmeg-Nyaraway, and she's recent, or 5 years or 10 years ago now, I think, passed away. She was an Aboriginal artist who never touched a paintbrush in her life until she turned 80 years old. And at 80, she started to paint. And she's probably the most famous Australian artist after, well, definitely the most famous Australian Aboriginal artist. She took the world by storm and painted 3,000 paintings in 5 years. She started somewhere around 80. Nobody really knew how old she was when she started. She certainly didn't know. And painted for 5 years. And in that time, she produced an oeuvre that has just literally exploded the world of both Aboriginal and contemporary art. Extraordinarily colourful pieces of work. I can't show them here without copyright, so I invite you to Google Emily Carme, we'll probably do it, and find some of those works of art, just beautiful pieces of work. But what's interesting about Emily is, you see, art is a spiritual expression. So she found that expression for herself late in life and started to share it with the world, and it just poured out of her. And that's what it occurs like when you've got that second half, kind of when you're on your leitmotif and you've got what there is to give back, it just pours out of you. And she was able to do that. But interestingly, when she got to the last series of paintings, the last 8 or 10 paintings, she started to paint less and less colour and broader and broader brushstrokes until by the last few paintings, she quite literally painted herself out of the picture altogether. And in fact, her last painting was virtually white. And she painted it, put it aside, and 2 or 3 days later, she died. So going back to the model that we had a moment ago, she had lived her early years, and then all the experiences of her life, all of this, she had brought into her art, and that's her expression, and started to express it in different forms of art. And then when she reached the end of this period here, in her 80s over here, she started to create her oeuvre, to give it back to the world. And right at the end, she painted herself right out until she was out of her own work, and then she died. And that is the journey of a human being. It's not a linear progression from birth to death in a straight line, and then the flame flickers and you fall off. It's 2 concurrent paths coming together and moving apart. But the leitmotif is the one that you need to find and follow. And the first half, the only function of the first half of life is to give you enough experiences so that you're able to see what that leitmotif is through them. A lot of people in the middle half of their life go through that period of doubt about whether they've been successful, whether they've got what there was to get, whether they've achieved what they needed to achieve. It doesn't matter, because the first half was all there just to give you access to the experiences that you needed in order to be able to find out what the second half was actually about. Because all the evidence shows, just like with Emily, that the second half is the richest and, or can be, the richest and the deepest experience of your life. If you do that work in the middle bit and you make that transition from this progression to this one. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what that middle part of life is like and how to make that transition across in the second half of the course. One person who has had a great deal of experience with this is Cherie Scott, who was my marriage celebrant, in fact, 12 years ago. And she spoke to me recently about her experience of her life. So I thought I'd just quickly share it with you for 2 or 3 minutes because it gives you an access to that progression. She told me on the phone call a couple of weeks ago that she had experienced a great deal of suffering and death in the first half of her life, and even domestic violence. And she went through the middle half of her life, through the 40s and into the 50s, married, had children, and really didn't make that transition to kind of understanding what her leitmotif was until 58. Now, the problem with waiting that long is that when it comes like a steamroller. Bang! If you don't heed the voices in the 40s, by the time the crisis hits you, it hits you hard. And it hit her really hard. She was 58 years old, having an argument with her husband, and words came out of her mouth she had no intention of saying. She said, "I need to move out." And she hadn't meant to say that. And 2 weeks later, I think she said it was 2 weeks, a short while later, she actually just moved out and had to create a life again at 58. And I hear this all the time with people who didn't hear that voice early on and kind of didn't listen to the doubts and just charged forward using the energy of the 30s to move onwards and upwards. By the time they reached their 50s, the energy was running out, and when the crisis came, it came like a steamroller. And for her, it did, and she just left her husband and moved into a small apartment and had to kind of recreate her life from the beginning. And when we started talking, she was really grappling with what's the second, like, I've just thrown everything out the window. And men and women, I hear this all the time. I just threw it all out and I had to start again. And she started to do that work to look at what was the leitmotif, what was the recurring theme in her life. And what she got was that she'd been resisting the recurring theme because it wasn't one she really wanted to hear. She had experienced so much stress and death and suffering and domestic violence in the first half of her life that the last thing she wanted was the second longest half of her life to be about that. But when she opened herself to that possibility and owned that she had actually a great deal to give in that space and started to give that back, she said to me, it was like I started to breathe clear air again. I was able to open my heart and create a life around my gift, what I had to give back into the world, that the world needed to hear, because she had experienced so much that when she started to give back, people heard what she had to say. And her life became one about that gift and crafting her last 20 or 30 years of her life around how to give that back. And it went from a life of struggle and real suffering, emotional stress, to one of real freedom and an opening of the life. And even her physicality, I won't share too much about it, but she's been struggling with a couple of, I think, motor neuron diseases through her life. And even that started to shift in those later years because she kind of got on track with what a leitmotif really was. So it's the thing that is in you and is screaming to get out. And those middle years of life, we talk about the midlife crisis, but it's the wrong way to look at it. That little voice that's speaking to you in those middle years, the doubts, the concerns, the stress, yes, it's a crisis. It's the crisis of the transition from your focus on the material to your focus on your gift. And if you don't listen to it, it's just going to get louder and louder and louder until it's screaming at you, and you'll have to break something later. But if you listen to it early and you start to make that transition, the shift in your life focus can be very small and a lot less painful for you and everyone around you. Probably the greatest thinker, knowledgeable person in this space, a guy called Bernard Leavegood. And I'm going to put his book up at the end, I think, for you to find if you want to do that at the end of the webinar, called Life Phases by Bernard Leavegood. He said that I'm the world expert in this, but knowing it made no difference. I still had to go through the midlife crisis. I still had to go through the 40s and discover my leitmotif. The only difference knowing all this made was that I was able to minimize the suffering on myself and minimize the impact on other people. So why is it this way? Why do we experience midlife crisis the way that we do, and is it necessary? Well, I mean, obviously, I don't think it's necessary, but I mean, it's necessary to experience a crisis. It's not necessary to have that level of suffering around it. You can make that shift to the leitmotif quite early in life. But we're pretty much the only society that hasn't consciously done that. We're stuck in that energy focus of the 30s and the early 40s and think we can keep doing that. Other societies haven't done it the same way, and there's a lot we could learn from them. This is a Maasai warrior, and that's a culture that did this transition through the 30s, the late 30s, sorry, and early 40s quite well, and there's a lot that we could learn about it. So I'm going to talk about the Maasai for just a second because it's really interesting and because it shows us something about the need for guides and support and how these cultures actually did that. So in the Maasai culture as a man, there's only one thing you want to be growing up, and that is to be a warrior. And you spend your entire life from 7 to 35 trying to become an Mnyata, a warrior, and achieving that status. I mean, you know, you have to do extreme things. They have to go and by hand personally kill a lion in order to be allowed to marry. They have to go through these trials and rituals of extreme physical suffering in order to go through the stages of warriordom, and they're driven to do that because there's nothing more valuable in that culture than to become a warrior. They finally achieve that somewhere around 28, if they've done them, if they're on track. And then they hit 35. They're married, they have children, they're a warrior. They hit 35, and all of a sudden, their weapons are literally taken from them. They are not allowed to touch their weapons. They lose the status of warrior, the thing they've striven so hard to achieve, and they become an elder at 35 years old. And interestingly, 35 is the age across virtually all cultures at which we become an elder. And it's not something we're comfortable with in our society because we think that's only like a third of the way through my life. Like, I'm not an elder, I'm still young. But actually, if you look back at all the previous cultures, even Western traditional cultures, which I'll get to in a minute, 35 was kind of a magical age where you made a transition from youth to elder. And in the Maasai culture, that meant that for the first time, you were held accountable for the welfare of your family. Interestingly, no Maasai is held accountable for the welfare of their family until that age. But at that age, they're expected to look after their family and kids. Until then, the village looked after them. By 35, they're 100% accountable. They're not allowed to touch their weapons. They're not allowed to be a warrior. And they're expected to start training the younger generation in what it means to be a warrior. Now, that's the external focus. All men at that age become an elder, and they all enter the Elders' Lodge. And they're expected to have a tough time for the next 7 to 12 years as they make the, particularly to 42, as they make that transition across transmuting their experience from the first half of life into the wisdom they can give back in the second half of life. And those 7 years of that transition are expected to be difficult because they need to let go of everything that they held to be self-identity and important to them, that they've spent so much and invested so much on achieving. They have to let all of that go they're no longer a warrior, and become an elder and take on the responsibilities of what that means. Now you can hear in this that we don't do this in our society. We don't make that transition, and we don't hold people as we make our way through it. Another culture, to bring it back home, that did something very similar was the German culture in up to the 19th century, where they used guilds to make that transition. And interestingly enough, 35 was again the cutoff point. You couldn't become a master guildsman or a master craftsman until you were 35 years old, even if you fulfilled the other criteria of being a guildsman, which was to create a master work. So you could have made the best artifact of your craft at 20 or 30, but you couldn't be a master craftsman until you had your 35th birthday, because you were held unable to be responsible for journeymen until you were at that age, because you were not an elder and you weren't able to transmute that knowledge, experience that you had into a wisdom you could give back. And you needed to be 35 to be able to do it. And again, you went into effectively an elder's lodge that lasted for 7 to 12 years, almost exactly the same as the Maasai, where you were expected to go through that transition, what Rudolf Steiner called the dark wood, where you couldn't know what the second half looked for, where you had to make that transition across from youth to elder, and where you were held very tightly because it's hard. It's a hard period to go through for people, and you weren't expected to be able to do it on your own. It was recognized in both of those cultures, both the African Maasai and the European traditional guild culture, that you needed some height. You needed to be able to be high enough above the experiences of youth to be able to see the path that you had traveled to get there and find your leitmotif. Somewhere down in the valleys around in front of this gentleman here, you can see my thing, somewhere down here was the path he had traveled. The golden line that brought him up to where he was now. And you need some vantage to see that. You need to be old enough to see it. And that process starts at about 38, and by 42, you can really start to see it. And if you've waited, like my client, my friend, to 62 to look, that path is so glaringly obvious, you cannot miss it. But at an earlier age, it takes a bit more work to pull it apart. And you need guides and supporters and mentors to see it, because you can't see the woods, see the path while you're on it. Now, the advantage of doing the work earlier is that a small change of direction earlier can make a profound difference later. Whereas if you wait a little bit longer in your life until you're a little bit older to do the work, it's not a problem. You can still make that transition, and you may already have done some of that work. But if you haven't, the gap between where you are in terms of your life progression, that kind of physical path down, and where you need to be, that spiritual or the gift-based path up, is bigger, and you need to make a bigger shift. It's a bit like train tracks. Early in the journey, if you make a small shift in the direction of your train tracks, you're going to end up in a very, very different place. Later in life, to end up where you need to, you've got to make a slightly larger bifurcation in the train tracks to get there. So earlier is better. Excuse me. If you do that work early on, and you do spend the time to discover your leitmotif, and you do find the recurring theme that was consistent throughout your life, then you have the opportunity to craft the second half of your life as a symphony. All the pieces of the orchestra, all the pieces of the puzzle are there in you in the early half of your life for you to see. If you've got the vantage, so you're of an age to be able to do it, and if you've got the support and the structures and the friends and the mentors and the guides around you to pull apart the dross from the gold, pull apart all the experiences that didn't matter or that kind of weren't the path from the experiences that showed up the path that you wanted. And when you're in it, you can't see it. But when you've got a little bit of distance, you can start to see it. And with that perspective, you're able to start to design a life that is hung off the gift you've got to give. Just like my friend Cherie was able to create a life right at the end, hanging off the gift that she had to give back to the world. You can craft a life of service and of giving in the second half. That doesn't mean you have to give up your job or give up your career or give quite the opposite. But you can have those things become the self-expression that you are in the world, and not in spite of the self-expression that you are in the world. And that's how to have your midlife crisis go from being something that you have to experience as a crisis to something that you can experience as a creation, and a creation of the deepest and the richest half of your life, the second half of your life. Now, the way we do that is we do it it takes about 12 months to do that. In my experience, it takes a good year. And a lot of the people that do this work with me or with other people come to it from the perspective of the 30s and early 40s, like there's a lot of work to do. But it's not an energy-based process. It's a process of shifting your focus from looking out at the world to looking in at yourself and back at your past. It's an introversion process of looking at what you have now in your life, where you are. And a key part of that is going back over the life that you have lived from the perspective of a 50-year-old man or a 60-year-old woman or a 48-year-old man or whatever age you are now, and re-experiencing all of the stages that you've experienced in that early 30 to 40 years of your life from the vantage point that you are now. And that takes about, in my experience, about 3 months to do. And it gives you a kind of a sense of where you are now in your life. Where are you from the perspective of you at 80 years? Not the perspective of you at a year or two in the future, but at 80 years old. And what have you got in terms of the experiences, the richness of experience that you can leverage, and the clarity of your experience of the leitmotif of your life? So that takes a little while to do that and to work your way through that. And the older you are, the faster it happens. And the younger you are, the more, sometimes it's a bit more fluffy and fuzzy. But it's better to do it early and not as clear, kind of how it goes. The second stage is kind of doing something that we have not been very good at doing in our society generally, and it's because we're so focused on the energy, the high energy of the early half, which is closing doors. You, in the middle stages of life, want to go look around the scope of your life and start to shut opportunities down. And it flies in the face of what we are trying to do. Keep the opportunities open, but there's a huge burden to keeping opportunities open. And you got the experiences you had by 42 or 48. You know who you are and who you're not. You know what you want and what you don't. And you've done the work to look back at your life and pull out that golden theme, that leitmotif. So now what there is to do is to get some real clarity around where you're going to go and what path you're going to follow. And the first step for doing that is to start to close doors that are not aligned with or consistent with that path. And you do that work and you start to close off options, and the path becomes clearer and clearer and clearer because there's only one thing left, and that's the piece that's fully you. So it naturally kind of flows into knowing what you do want for the second half of your life. Now, children create this part children create this part very, very easily. They find it quite easy to do. They create it as easily as breathing, but adults don't find it as easy to do. But after this first 6 months or so of looking into what your golden path is, what your leitmotif is, and what you don't want, it actually flows naturally into what you do want, and it becomes, in my experience doing this with people, it's almost like you don't get to create anymore. It just calls you, and you just need to start kind of getting aligned with it. So it's more of you've kind of discovered it, and now it's like pulling you. This is you, this is you, this is you, this is where you need to go, this is what you need to do, and it starts to pour out of people. A bit like what Emily Carmen-Yaraway was doing later, it just kind of came out of her. Well, if you do this work and look inwardly, it starts to kind of bubble up quite quickly. And again, the older you are, the more powerful the drive is, and the younger you are, the smaller the trajectory, but in some ways more important, because you can avoid some of those pitfalls that the middle years can otherwise present. So you can kind of see where this is going. I mean, the natural next step is to then make that step away from the trajectory that you're in now to the trajectory that fulfills on the gift that you have started to get clear for yourself about where you actually want to go in your life, and taking some concrete steps for how to get there. Now, again, when you're younger, these steps might be smaller, and when you're older, they can be a little bit larger, depending on kind of how much of this work you've done for yourself. But what it really does mean is that you're able to concretely shift your life and the direction of your life so that it's aligned with and consistent with your leitmotif, and starts to fulfill on what it is that your gift is. And your sense of power and freedom and self-expression will expand consistent with the degree to which it's actually fulfilling on what is in you to give back. So they're the kind of 4 stages that I discovered thinking deeply and reading deeply and looking at my own life and working with people over the last number of years on how to do this. These are the stages that these men's middle-aged lodges, I said men's and women's structures in previous cultures allowed for. Knowing what you have now, knowing what you don't want, and then looking at what you want. And we often fall into the trap of just going into what do we want now without doing that preliminary work. It's kind of icing over mud. If you don't take the time in the middle years to look inwards and back, then what you'll create will be an extrapolation of what you've already done in the past, and it isn't going to be aligned with your leitmotif and what's your gift to give back. It's going to be a variation of what you had before. Now, again, it doesn't mean that you need to, you suddenly throw in your job, although you might. I mean, I did, but it might mean that. It just means that you get clear on what your leitmotif is and start to hang your life on that. Now, if you want to have a deeper conversation about this with me, that's totally fine. I've scheduled a couple of days in the next 2 or 3 weeks to do that with people. So that Calendly, Mark, schedule a call. I think you can click on it on this schedule a call here. But if you can't, then I'm going to put it up in the Zoom chat right in a minute, and you'll be able to do that. You can also find it on my website. If you want to find out more about the program itself, you can go to that register link down here and register directly, or you can go, not a live link. Okay, thanks. Someone just told me it's not live. I'll put that up in just a second. But you can register directly, and all the information about the structure and cost and everything of the program are actually in the registration link there as well. So you can find out a bit more about it there. So the structure of the program, I'll just quickly go through that for you. The next one, we do one most quarters. The next one starts on August the 6th. It costs $12,000 to do the full year of the program, or you can do it in quarters. And for some people that works better. Each quarter stands alone. So each of the 3 themes, looking back over your life and but distinguishing what the leitmotif is for your life, then shutting doors, then creating what you want, and then taking the first steps in creating a new trajectory. Each of those 4 quarters stand alone and work in their own right, but they are designed to be a full program, and I usually obviously invite people to consider the whole thing, because it's designed to to take you from where you are now to actually having your life on a new trajectory by the end of the 12 months. That's what you will get. The deposit's $1,000 in both cases, so you can either pay in full, in which case you get a discount of $2,000 for registering into the whole program. And in my experience of that, it's a more powerful way to go, because you get to invest straight into creating that second half of your life. But it doesn't always work for people. So for the people who don't do that, you can just purchase it quarter by quarter. And again, the registration links are below. Do feel free to register a call with me. I'm more than happy to have a chat with anyone that was on the webinar. Like, those times are available, so there are a couple of times on, I think it's Tuesdays and Thursdays mornings. So if you get in there and lock yourself in, I've made myself available to have those calls with the people that did that. There's only, I think, 2 or 3 weeks I'm going to be doing that. And if you want to find out more, then that's the registration link. So I promised to put that up. I'm going to have to go off this screen to do that. But I really wanted to thank you all for your time and your attention. I'm sorry for those people who were unable to get access to the, I was able to unanswer their questions. But if you did put a question up there, I'll be getting back to you as soon as I can. This is in the chat now. I'm just putting it up for you. Hopefully if that isn't a live link, then you are able to cut and paste that directly into the URL and go to the website directly that way. So yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. The thing I would want to leave, I'm going to send you all an email at the end of this with the book I suggested by Bernard Leavegood called Life Phases. He has an extraordinarily powerful approach to all the phases of life from the beginning to the end of your life. I invite you to have a look at that. You're all on my newsletter, so I'll be sending you newsletter links, so you'll be able to get access to that. The newsletters every week or so around this. The only thing I'd want to say is the 40s and early 50s are a difficult period of life. They're meant to be. You do need to make that transition from the focus on the material and the physical in the first half. And our society is heavily weighted towards that. That is really what we value. So it's kind of swimming against the tide, although the tide is shifting, to start looking from the perspective of what your gift is and what you can give back. But if you do that work in your 40s, then you do have the opportunity to create a second half that is meaningful and joyful and deeply satisfying for you. And all the people who have lived to those ages of life who did that work have spoken of those years as the most, as the richest. But the 40s, like in this picture, I didn't choose it by accident. It's the cornerstone in the arch. This part here, if I can annotate it, which I can't. So this part here below the thank you, that little round circle, that's the 40s. It's the bit that holds the first half of your life and links it to the second half. And it's the critical period where you can do this work and create a second half that is meaningful. And it's time that we started to give each other the opportunity to do that. You cannot do it on your own. You need to find people to support you as you go through that journey, whether me or other people who can help you do that, your church groups, your friends, elders. But don't try to do it on your own. It doesn't work. No society's ever been successful at doing that. And be really gentle on yourself. It's not an easy period. I've said that 6 times if I didn't get the message through. And just thank you for taking the time to start exploring that for yourself. Click on the link Calendly if you want to have a conversation with me about that. Register yourself into the program if you feel that you would like to have the opportunity to do this work and have a guide to walk beside you as you create the second half of life. There is nothing I get greater pleasure in my life than doing that with people. And if you do want to communicate with me, you can find me on my website or get me, me or my business manager will get back to you if you email via email, and I'll always get back to you if I can. Great. So thank you once again for your time. Definitely will find that book. Yeah, I'll send the book to you. If anybody's got any questions, now is the time to ask them. We do have about 4 minutes. I finally got that information up. There you go. To register, the details are there. The Calendly call there. If you have any good questions, I'm just going to stay on the line now for 5 minutes and talk to anyone that has anything that's come up about this conversation, and then close the call at 1 o'clock. So thank you for your time. Does anybody have any questions they would like to ask? Or have you seen anything that you can see for your own life, especially around the leitmotif and looking back over your life? Do you think you can see what that is? If so, just plump it up in the chat. Thanks, Ken. Good talking to you. Karen, if I unmute you for a moment, would you want to share what you heard in this conversation, or is that asking too much? Oh. All right, unmute. Hello, Karen, are you there?
Hi, Sunny. Yes,
Hi.
I am.
Great.
Hi.
Thanks for being on the call.
I was very pleased to be able to be on the call today. There were many things pressing for my attention, but I made it a priority. I'm very I have such an affinity with this subject matter, and I agree with you about the emphasis in culture at the moment on the millennials and the boomers, and we sort of don't have a sense of definition, us Generation X's or whatever.
No. When I look around the people of our age of life, I'm conscious that there's a lot of people drifting. Like my father, they're drifting, putting one step in front of the other because they know what to do. They're good at it, but it doesn't give them any joy. But it's kind of easy to keep moving forward. Can I ask you a question? Did you get any insight from that conversation around your leitmotif and what that might be? I mean, it's a huge question to ask, right? So I'm not expecting a definitive answer.
That's okay. That's fine. Insights in terms of my own particular journey, do you mean?
Yes.
Well, I certainly relate to having watched my father not get into a lot deeper alignment with his purpose, and it really called me to find mine in my life, similar to how you've experienced it.
Yes.
I think what I've heard in the presentation, the thing that stood out to me the most was that by being able to say no to the things that aren't in alignment with you,
yes,
that you really clearly find the path forward.
It's definitely not something we're good at in our culture.
Oh, goodness me, no.
Totally.
And especially with social media and the way the digital reality is, like it
Yes.
can be so easy to be lost in there for years and
Right.
not come out and be connected with yourself and nature and figure out what your contribution is.
Who you are and what you've got to give back. That's right.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I think that was the number one takeaway for me, was just such a lovely articulation of that the self-definition process that really I'm experiencing myself.
Well, here's my invitation. Get a piece of paper and start writing down all the things you're going to close doors on. Literally.
Yeah, I love it.
All the things that you wanted in your life, start writing all the dreams you had as a child, and then just start crossing them off. I'm not going to do that, not going to do that, not going to do that, not going to do that. And you'll find a few that really matter to you. And underneath them will be some act of generosity. I promise you.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you. I will.
Right. I'm just going to grab Ken for a second because he's still there. Ken, do you mind if I mute you? I'm just going to mute you now, Karen. Thanks, mate.
Hi. Danny, can
Yeah? Oh, I think I just muted you, mate. Ken, yes, I can hear you. How are you?
That's good. Good. Not bad. Not bad. That was great, Sonny. Thank you.
My pleasure. So I'm going to throw you the big one. Did you see anything around your leitmotif and in your own life that might have been?
You know what kind of the recurring theme with me is that my concern is that, we all have, I guess, motivation to follow, the path that you have been talking about. but the issue is that other people are not on the same page. You know, it's difficult when you have, I hope I'm being clear here. It's difficult when, you know, you have certain ideas about where, you know, path you want to follow, but it's you know, it's kind of hard when other people, you know, still have those ties to materialism.
Yes.
And you know,
you need to swim against the tide in quite a strong way. And look, it was hard enough for the Maasai and the German guildsmen to be able to make that transition across. In our culture, where there's just no support for it, no value for that internal journey, it's all about mindset, rah, 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 keep going, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it. There's no space for people to stop, take stock, and look inwards at who they are and what they've learned. Is that what you're trying to say? Yeah,
correct.
It's really difficult for people, and it was difficult enough for those people who had structures around them, and we don't have structures around them. Have you had an opportunity to do that for yourself, to have a look, you know, at what your gift is to the world, or would you say that that's?
I think I'm, you know, over the last little bit, you know, especially, you know, because I've had a few employment issues, and you know, I left Canada, I left a good government job there, came to Australia, you know, a few years ago. And it's kind of been a bit of a struggle. So yeah, over the last little bit, I have been reflecting on a lot of things. You know, I guess probably looking at a lot of choices and possible mistakes. You know, I don't know if you can really. I mean, you can't really look at.
I'm going to interrupt you for a moment and just suggest book a call with me. Okay.
Okay.
Go to that Calendly. Book a call with me. You are in the perfect place right now.
Yeah.
Perfect place. Okay, so have a chat with me and we'll work through that, and I can give you access.
Okay.
All right.
I'll do that.
Thanks, mate. I'll mute you now. And Shez at NBC Melbourne. I'm so sorry, I don't know who you are, but do you want to just have a quick chat for 30 seconds? I might just unmute you and ask you. Feel free to say no, thank you very much. Hello, are you there?
Yeah, it's me, Cherie.
Oh, it's you, Cherie. I wasn't sure who it was.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
A little confusing.
Not at all.
Yeah. What I got was that I started late, had my daughter at age 38.
Yeah.
And at like 42, I had the corner of the handkerchief of like, this is not really how I want to, you know, be living. And but it took me until 56 to actually kind of go, nah.
Make that break that I talked about. Were you here when I talked about you?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Did I do okay?
Yeah, just a couple of little things, but just you know, you're out by a couple of years. But but no, it was really clear to me that I was kind of living a remedial life, and now I'm very clear about what is calling me, and that getting present to the life of suffering was not fun, and it's certainly not what I would have chosen as a late life career path kind of thing. But it is calling me, and I am making strides. So
if you were going to give
exciting
listening to you, someone who's made this transition, you know, we don't all have to make it. I mean, there's a gentleman I know who I'm talking to about this program, who's a very good friend of his, who's a mentor, very, very wealthy man. I think I was in my last article, died at 80, and there was no one at his wedding, no one at his funeral because he had no friends. And so he didn't make that transition, right? But you did. You made that transition. So is there anything you would say to people, like as advice to people around doing that for themselves?
Well, geez, I you know, in hindsight, I wish I'd started earlier.
Right.
And I actually did sort of try and get support, but there wasn't really that much of a willingness. There was too much stuff that I needed to deal with, and it wasn't until I stepped out that I was able to deal with that. But yeah, definitely starting earlier. And I really resonated with what you said about how we're not held in transition. You know, one of the things I worked at doing when I was a celebrant and working with you and Deb was to really, you know, hold a space and for a process of a transition, and that's not there. So
you need it in a wedding. You didn't, obviously, and we recognise that in a wedding, although some don't. but we don't
Well,
recognize.
it wasn't about the wedding, it was about the life. And when my husband and I got married, we didn't have that.
Right.
We didn't have a me.
Yeah.
And you know, you and Deb had training and so forth that helped you to do that, the most of it. So I really resonate with that piece of having a mentor, a guide, someone to hold space for you and a structure to work through to get the clarity at a time when it can be the most, when it can make the most difference. Because I am late, you know, I turn 63 next month, so I'm just scraping in really under the bar.
Yeah.
But so I celebrate the project, the course that you're offering and what it will provide for people. And we just don't have those sort of structures in our culture much.
We don't.
The closest thing is kind of like a life coach, but that's not specific to this particular
Rudolf Steiner,
way of finding
right.
who you are and what you have to offer.
He called it the dark wood because it's not because it's a bad place, but it is a dark wood. You cannot, and Ken, goes to what you were saying a minute ago, but maybe even to you too, Karen, a bit. You can't know what your path is when you're in the wood. You actually need to be guided through it. And the analogy is a good one because you can either pass straight through the dark wood or you can meander and suffer on your way through. Right? But unless you've got a guide, you can't pass straight through it. And until you're through it and starting to rise the other side, you can't see the path that you've taken to get there. And that's what you need to craft the second half of your life on, what that path is. And you, me, everyone. I mean, I have my mentor is, well, I've got several, but in this space, he's 67 years old, turned 67 2 weeks ago. And he said, you know, my experience of life is I'm just starting to wind up. I'm just starting to wind up, and but I don't use energy to get ahead. I don't need it anymore. Now I'm like, oh my God, like that's, but he did this work. He did this work in his 40s and 50s. So look, last piece.
It's this work enables people to be elders in the making. We don't have elders in our culture. We have olders for the most part. And so doing this work and becoming clear about what you're giving back actually is your pathway to being an elder, and the world needs elders rather than just elders.
Work now, you'll be able to help others when they're going to 40 do it too. Yes. Thank you. That's the kind of big game that I'm playing. That's the big one. Because our generation doesn't have it. We need to make sure that my children's generation does. And the only place to do that is with us now. So great. Thanks, Sherry. I'll give you a call after. Thanks everyone for your time. Karen, I hope you book yourself a call because I think we could have another chat about that. And Ken, I'll talk to you when I talk to you soon. And anyone else that's registered for a call, thanks for doing that. I'm looking forward to having I really deeply am looking forward to having a chat with you. And thanks everyone for coming onto the webinar.